Another day, another Gonzaga guard entering the NCAA transfer portal. This time it is Hunter Sallis. What does his likely departure mean for the Zags? And is this the start of a trend in Spokane?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome to the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to give you daily reports through another offseason of Gonzaga basketball. Folks, I did not want these season in review episodes to end up being about the transfer portal every time, but unfortunately, we are now on our second season in review episode. The first one, of course, about guard Dominick Harris on Thursday's episode after he entered the transfer portal. Now here we are talking about Hunter Sallis and his decision to enter the transfer portal. We're going to talk about his season, his numbers, why he might have entered the portal, what this means for Gonzaga and their guard rotation next season, and just kind of their offseason in general. We'll close out the show kind of taking a look at Sallis's future, where he may end up, what this all kind of means for him. Again, it's part of our season in review series, so we're going to try to kind of keep the same format as much as we can. But of course, in this one, it's a bit more depressing as we're talking about a player leaving the program, the second player choosing to enter the transfer portal in the same offseason. This is unprecedented territory for Gonzaga. We haven't seen them lose a lot of players. It's something I've talked about a handful of times on this podcast. Just the number of players who have chose to leave Gonzaga when Gonzaga still would have wanted them around. There just haven't been that many of them. And I think Dom and Hunter are both players that Gonzaga would have absolutely preferred to keep. They wanted these guys to be in the building, in the facility for next season. And again, they could choose, either of them could choose in theory to commit back to Gonzaga. That could happen. I'm not overly optimistic that either of them will choose to do that. But it's tough because for so long, Gonzaga never really saw this happen. For Harris, or excuse me, for Dom, for Hunter in particular, it makes sense when you kind of look at his five-star pedigree. There's only been 3 5-star players who have ever come to Gonzaga. Jalen Suggs, one and done, top 5 pick in the NBA draft. Chet Holmgren, one and done, top 5 pick in the NBA draft. And Hunter Sallis, who in his second season at Gonzaga, I think he understood that the first year was maybe not going to be a ton of playing time, but his playing time didn't tick up all that much from year 1 to year 2. Here in his second season, Sallis played 37 games for the Bulldogs. He averaged 16.7 minutes per night, so just under 17 minutes, playing about half the basketball game, a little less than that. And his numbers were good. They don't jump off the page in an elite way. 4.5 points per game, 2 boards, 1.5 assists, 0.6 steals per game. But of course, that does not tell the story of who Hunter Sallis was, who Hunter Sallis is, who he is going to be coveted by. We're going to see some really, really big name programs involved in Hunter Sallis's recruiting at this point. I can guarantee you that. And people who are unfamiliar with him are going to say, why is so-and-so, let's say Alabama, let's say, some of these top tier programs, why are they interested in a guy who only averaged 4.5 points per game for Gonzaga? And again, that is not telling the entire story. Hunter Sallis was primarily utilized as an on-ball defensive player, and he is elite at it. So good as a tenacious defensive player. His energy, his tenacity, his hands, he's fantastic on that end of the floor. He has some stuff he needs to work on. And I think that Mark Few kind of tried to indicate that as politely as he could during the season, because there was a lot of people, myself included, clamoring for him to play more minutes throughout the season. I mean, there was a very strong push. Why isn't Hunter Sallis playing more? And of course, it goes back to the kind of the same conversation we have with Dom, where it's harder for fans and players and anybody involved to accept not playing as much when the guys in front of you aren't playing all that well. And especially at the end of the year, Rasir Bolton and Nolan Hickman did not play all that well. It made it tough. I can completely sympathize, as I'm sure many of you can as well, with wanting to play more and feeling frustrated when the other guys are not playing all that well. And I think that's kind of what we saw from Hunter. We saw a guy who he had some foul trouble, and that sometimes cost him minutes. And I understand that. Certainly don't blame Mark Few for not playing him when he's picked up 2 quick fouls or has 3 fouls already or whatever. And that's an area of his game that needs to improve. I mean, it just needs to. I think it will. I think he's so athletic and so gifted just from a basketball IQ perspective. It's hard for me to imagine that he won't improve in that area, but it did cost him minutes this season. We also saw Gonzaga kind of struggle to figure out what role he was going to fill offensively. And I think, and I don't have inside information here. I want to make that clear. I'm just going to say that off the bat. I know a lot of people have reached out for Mailbag Monday, have asked questions. Why did Hunter Sallis leave? Do you have any information on that? I don't. And I suspect it has more to do with his role offensively. I think it has mostly to do with lack of playing time, wanting to go somewhere where he's going to have a more featured role, all of that stuff. But I think for Gonzaga, they used him mostly off ball early in the year. And then kind of as the season went on, he kind of became the de facto backup point guard and was playing a lot of actual point guard minutes. He was the guy bringing the ball up the floor, the guy getting Gonzaga into their offensive rhythm. And he wasn't a super huge facilitator. His assist numbers didn't pop in an extreme way, but he got Gonzaga into their offense effortlessly and kind of made more things happen. And this is what I talked about a lot towards the end of the season regarding him and Nolan Hickman. I defended Nolan Hickman a lot because he improved significantly at not turning the basketball over to an extreme degree. I don't think people realized how good he was at not turning the basketball over in the latter 3/4 of the season. The problem for Nolan Hickman was that he wasn't making a lot of things happen. He was kind of just there. And I that sounds mean and I don't want it to, but when he's not hitting shots, which is what happened towards the end of the year, he wasn't adding a whole lot. He was a fine defensive player, took decent care of the basketball, made some decent passes, kind of got the offense going, but he didn't make a lot of things happen. Sallis did. And that's what makes this frustrating, is that Hunter Sallis, I think, had more potential to really impact the game as a starting point guard, potentially, with Nolan Hickman maybe filling more of an off-ball role. I kind of envision that being something that could have happened next year. Maybe Hunter Sallis and Nolan Hickman both start. Maybe Malachi Smith comes back. They do a 3-guard lineup. And you see a situation where Sallis is more of the facilitator, more of the actual kind of on-ball playing, facilitating the offense type of role, whereas Nolan Hickman's more off-ball, more of a shooter type of guy. I think that could have worked. And it's unfortunate that we're not going to see that. We have to address whether this is now a trend for the Zags. And I want to be clear. I am not alarmed by this happening. I am sad, as I think many, if not all of you, are sad to lose both Dominick Harris and Hunter Sallis, 2 very talented players, 2 guys who I think could have had bright futures at Gonzaga, but chose to go elsewhere. And I do not blame either of them. I am not alarmed by this. Top-tier programs are losing players in the portal. It's just what is happening. North Carolina has 5 guys in the portal. I know that calling them top tier when they didn't make the tournament maybe is a bit misleading, but Kansas, they were number 1 seed. They have 5 players in the transfer portal. Indiana has 4. There are so many other high-profile programs who have 2, 3, 4, 5 players in the transfer portal. This is just what's happening. And I have been a champion of this being allowed. I think players should be able to have more autonomy over where they play basketball. I think committing to a school when you're 18 years old and being forced to stay there without penalty or else face a penalty is silly. But I understand why this is also difficult, and especially for a program like Gonzaga that has kind of prided themselves on 2, 3, 4-year development plans. That may be something that they have to alter. And we'll have longer conversations about this in the offseason, because right now we're just focused on Hunter Sallis. But for Gonzaga, I mean, Joel Iayi was a 3-year development plan. Rui Hachimura was a 3-year development plan. Like, there are many, many other players who, and we'll talk about it more later, who were on 2, 3, or 4, even 4-year development plans. Corey Kispert, a great 4-year development guy. That may, and I'm sure Gonzaga is selling that, and I'm sure that that's what they're kind of pushing for, but it's not always going to work. And when you get high-profile players, when you get 4-star guys, 5-star guys, guys with NBA aspirations, when you get them in the building and they don't play for a couple of years, they're going to be frustrated. It's kind of part of how it works. And when you have the ability to transfer, you have the ability to go have other schools look at you and express interest and try to convince you to come to your program or whatever. We're going to see more of this. And it sucks. But I also think Gonzaga cannot change the way that they develop talent. They cannot change the way that they grow, that they operate because of this. They just can't. It doesn't make sense. You have to make tweaks. You have to make adjustments. Absolutely. But if your plan is to find players that you believe can grow and develop in this program, you have to do that. And if you bring a player in with the expectation that, hey, you're not going to start right away, if that player chooses to leave because of that, you have to be willing to accept that. And I think that's kind of the situation here. Hunter Sallis was a 5-star player. He envisioned, I don't know exactly what he envisioned. I know he envisioned a bigger role in year 2 than he got. And that's what happened. And to be clear, I don't think Mark Few and the staff should play players they shouldn't be playing players because of fear that they might transfer. Having said that, I want to make this clear as well. There are plenty of other reasons that Hunter Sallis should have played more minutes this past year. And he didn't. And I mean, if this is your very first time listening to Locked On Zags, first of all, welcome. Then you may not know this, but for anybody else who has listened throughout the season, you know how much I have championed Hunter Sallis to play more minutes, to have a bigger role on this team. That's why this sucks. That's why this sucks, is that he didn't really get that opportunity, and now he's going to leave. And it's hard. And it's going to happen more. Maybe not this offseason, I don't know, but it will happen more. In some situations, it will just be a situation of a guy didn't quite crack the rotation and he left. That's kind of what the situation was with Dominick Harris. In this situation, I do feel like he deserved more playing time regarding Hunter Sallis, and he didn't get it. And now he's leaving. And that's a huge bummer. It really is. So what does this mean? What does this mean for Gonzaga in particular? We'll get to what it means for Hunter Sallis, but what does it mean for Gonzaga? Well, it means that if the portal is going to take away, the portal had better give back. And we're going to talk more about that after a word from today's sponsor, Built Bar. The Built Bar March Madness bracket is here, and we know that you have a favorite bar or puff, and now is your time to make it count. So go to builtmarchmadness.com to vote for your favorites. You know that I'm going to be voting for the churro bar, and if you want your favorite bar or puff to win, then you'll be voting for that bar too. Support your team, support your bar or puff, and when you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you will be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. Not only that, but one Locked On fan will win a 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. You have got to try Built. It is the best protein bar ever. Seriously, they are so amazing, and you will not think they're good for you. What makes Built bars and puffs so good? Well, for starters, they are high in protein, they are low in sugar, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. So run to Built March Madness right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. Built Bar, a proud sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags. I want to thank all of you for making Locked On Zags your first listen of the day and remind you to go check out the Locked On College Basketball podcast for your second listen. It's myself, co-host Isaac Shade of Locked On Tar Heels. We recorded a show every single day in the month of March, including weekends, and we still have more great content coming your way, of course, previewing tonight's national championship game. We are also going to discuss offseason stuff, transfer portal stuff. Hey, we'll have some thoughts on Hunter Sallis entering the portal on that show as well. You can find it wherever you already get podcasts. You can also go hit that subscribe button on YouTube if you have not done so yet. All right, what does this mean for Gonzaga? What does having 2 players in the last 4 days enter the transfer portal mean? Well, it's not great. There's not really any other way to put it. It leaves a pretty big hole in Gonzaga's backcourt. Right now, the players seemingly locked into spots in Gonzaga's backcourt next year. Nolan Hickman and Dusty Stromer. That is it. That is it. Hunter Sallis out the door. Dominick Harris out the door. Rasir Bolton, because of graduation, out the door. Malachi Smith is a huge question mark right now, because he has another year of eligibility, because he showed, especially towards the end of the season, that he can be a high level contributor to this program at this level against this competition. He proved it throughout the season, but he really took on a big role at the end of the year. I have to imagine that the Gonzaga coaching staff right now is working overtime to convince Malachi Smith to come back to Gonzaga. Now, a couple people have suggested to me in messages, on email, whatever, that Hunter Sallis' decision to enter the portal must mean that Malachi Smith has already decided he's returning. I want to clear the air on that. I don't believe that that is the case. In fact, Hunter Sallis' mother on Twitter recently kind of made a indication that, hey, that's not part of the decision here. We didn't make this decision based on what other people are doing. We made this decision for us, for him. So Malachi Smith's status doesn't mean that he hasn't already said he's coming back. Maybe he has. Maybe they have had that conversation. I have no idea. But I just would caution that reading too far into Sallis and Dom's decisions it doesn't necessarily mean anything for anybody else on the team. But having said all that, it's clear that Malachi Smith would have a huge role on this team were he to return. If he wanted to come back, he would have a starting spot. I don't want to say locked up. It depends on how the rest of the portal goes, but he right now would be penciled into a starting spot clearly for Gonzaga. He would have a much bigger role offensively because there is not a Drew Timme down low to kind of take such a huge chunk of the usage for Gonzaga. Just so many shots, so much possessions go through Drew Timme. That's not going to happen next year. It might happen through whoever starts at center for Gonzaga, whether it's Anton Watson, whether it's a transfer portal addition, whether it's Efton Reed. Of course, Ben Gregg is going to take a big chunk of possessions as well. But I think for Malachi Smith, there is an obvious path to having a really, really big role in his final year of eligibility at Gonzaga. What this also means is that the Zags need to hit the portal. And they need to hit the portal pretty darn hard, because the expectation right now is the Zags have a minimum of 2 scholarships available, because Drew Timme, Rasir Bolton, Dominick Harris, Hunter Sallis are all gone. Again, I mentioned this already. In theory, 3 of those 4 guys could return. Drew Timme, I think it's like 0.0000, etc., 1% that he decides to come back. I would be surprised if either Dom or Hunter Sallis chose to came back either, but you never know. Assuming they do not, that is 4 players out the door. Alex Tui, the Australian combo forward who's coming in as a freshman next year, and then, of course, Dusty Stromer, they take 2 of those spots. The Korean kid, Yoon Suk Ho, I mispronounced that there. He is coming back, but he already has a scholarship. My understanding is that he took Martinez Arlauskas' scholarship when he showed up on campus in the spring semester. So he doesn't count as a scholarship there. Alex Tui, Dusty Stromer, they take 2, 4 guys out the door. That leaves Gonzaga with at least 2 scholarship spots open right now, and that is without us knowing what is going to happen to these following 3 players: Julian Strawther, Anton Watson, and of course, Malachi Smith. Theoretically, other players could leave too. I have heard no indication that anybody else is interested in leaving. I am not going to posture on anybody else leaving, but there are other players on the roster who are under scholarship who could enter the transfer portal. So right now, the Zags are going to have at least 2 spots available, probably more. I don't think all 3 of Julian Strawther, Anton Watson, and Malachi Smith are coming back. I am optimistic that 2 of those 3 will come back, with the expectation being that Julian Strawther is going to declare for the NBA draft and keep his name in the draft and proceed with his professional basketball career. That is my assumption. That is not a fact. But if the Zags lose Julian Strawther and are able to convince Anton Watson and Malachi Smith to return, that would give them 3 spots to fill this offseason. That means they're going to be looking at the transfer portal pretty darn hard. And I think, you're losing your starting center in Drew Timme. You have, again, if Anton Watson comes back, that's huge, because I think you start Watson and Gregg in the front court, and you have Efton Reed be your 3rd center, and he fills a valuable role there. And then your transfer portal addition in the front court doesn't necessarily have to be a super high-end player. It also depends on how Gonzaga feels about Braden Huff and or Caden Perry and his health. And those players could, in theory, step into a 4th big role as well and create a situation where Gonzaga doesn't necessarily need to go after high-end talent in the transfer portal at the front court. Of course, if players are interested, I think Gonzaga should try to get every talented player that they can. Why would you not go after the best players you can? Yes, you have to figure out roster construction. You have to figure out trying to keep everybody happy. But at the end of the day, if you can get a high-level starter, if Hunter Dickinson wants to come to Gonzaga, which, to be clear, I think is very, very unlikely, because I am pretty sure that Hunter Dickinson is in the transfer portal to make as much money as he possibly can, because he knows that his NBA aspirations are limited, the same way that Oscar Tshiebwe's and Drew Timme's and Trace Jackson Davis and all those guys kind of are. So I think Hunter Dickinson's in the portal to try to find as much money as he can. I doubt that's going to come from Gonzaga, but if, let's say, it happens, or somebody like that wants to come to Spokane, yeah, you're gonna take them, and you're gonna figure out the rest of the roster and what that means at a later date. But overall, I think Gonzaga is going to prioritize guards in the portal. I think there's a decent chance that they try to rebuild their entire guard rotation, sans Nolan Hickman, next season. They might have to do that. And who knows what's going to happen with Nolan Hickman either. I mean, the Zags might need an entire new crop of guards next year. And the portal is going to have plenty of them. They already do. There are some very big names already in the transfer portal right now. We'll talk about them more in the coming weeks. We already discussed Dalton Connect from Northern Colorado. We discussed Jalen Cook from Temple. Both those guys were discussed on Friday's episode of Locked On Zags. If you haven't checked it out, you can go find it wherever you get podcasts. Other huge names, Caleb Love from North Carolina. Don't think he's a great fit at Gonzaga, but he's a big name, that's for sure. Severe Wheeler from Kentucky. He's a little undersized, not great offensively, but elite defensively. If you're losing Hunter Sallis, Severe Wheeler is the kind of player that can replicate at least that kind of archetype player. Like he's a similar style of player. Kirk Reese is in the portal. Again, don't think he's a great fit at Gonzaga, but a name to keep an eye on. Taron Armstrong from Cal Baptist. We'll talk about him more later. Posh Alexander from St. John's. Others from St. John's, Andre Curbelo and AJ Storr, both from St. John's. MJ Rice from Kansas. Hakeem Hart from Maryland. These are just some names. Again, we'll get into some more details on these guys as you know. In future episodes, we'll do some more transfer portal conversations. If you follow me on Twitter, Andy Patton CBB, we discuss which players we want to talk about on future episodes there. So you can definitely follow me there and vote in those polls. But the Zags are going to have to find some guards. That's the biggest thing that's going to happen. I think it's going to be kind of a fun offseason. It's not the most fun reasoning to have to do it because of losing players in the portal. That's not fun for anybody, but I expect that Gonzaga is going to be connected to a whole bunch of names throughout this transfer portal process. And I'm going to bring you as much up-to-date information as I possibly can between now and mid-May when the portal season closes. All right, so what's next for Sallis? This is a guy who's primed for a potentially huge breakout depending on where he ends up at his next spot. We're going to talk about that to close out the show right after this. All right, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags, still talking to Hunter Sallis and his decision to enter the NCAA transfer portal on Friday afternoon. We talked about his history and kind of what it means for him. We talked about what this transfer portal business kind of means for Gonzaga, especially seeing 2 players enter the portal in such quick succession. We also talked about just what might be next for the Zags, who they might pursue in the portal, all of that good stuff. But I want to close the show, just talk about Hunter, talk about Sallis, because he's one of my favorite players to watch over the last couple of years. And like I said, I championed and advocated significantly for him to play more minutes throughout the season. And unfortunately, it never really happened. We saw some flashes, some glimpses of greatness. And I think he clearly proved he deserves to play and deserves to be at this level. And he's going to get a lot of attention. He's going to get a lot of love in the transfer portal process. He's a 5-star player. He has that pedigree. He has that athleticism. He's well known around the kind of college basketball circles already. He's already cropped up on draft boards in the past. I don't think he's going to pursue that this year necessarily, but he's going to have plenty of suitors. Things that I'm curious about. I'm curious if teams are going to pursue him as a point guard or as a combo guard, because like I said, he kind of played both roles at Gonzaga. His freshman year, he didn't really play true point guard at all, thanks to thanks to Andrew Nembhard, let's say it that way. Andrew Nembhard was there. Nolan Hickman was the backup point guard. They just didn't have any room for Sallis to play kind of an on-ball point guard role. And then this year, I think the expectation was that Hickman would be the primary point guard and that either Bolton or Malachi Smith would kind of play more of the backup point guard minutes. And right before the season, few kind of mentioned, hey, Hunter Sallis he's going to play more of that on-ball one point guard role. And we didn't see it early in the year. And then we started to see it. And I think you can see the appeal. You can see why he's getting that attention. And he's got some stuff to work on, like I said, ball handling, things that are easy to fix, the things that I think other programs will be able to tighten up for him. And so it'll be interesting to see how he is perceived. And of course, if he chooses to go to a spot where he's going to be a point guard versus a combo guard, I think that'll tell us a lot about maybe what he wants for himself, how he envisions himself as a player, and maybe why that didn't jive in Spokane. Hunter Sallis is from Nebraska. That's not a secret. That's a pretty well-known fact. It means that 2 programs have kind of immediately emerged as potential suitors for him. That is Creighton and Nebraska. I try not to just assume players are going to go closer to home. It is often what happens. It would be silly to not acknowledge that it is frequently something that occurs, but it is not a guarantee. It is not a guarantee. Creighton and Nebraska are far, far, far from the only Power 6 programs showing interest in Hunter Sallis. We haven't really gotten a full list yet. I think we will. And when we do, we will discuss it more on the podcast. We'll talk about potential spots for him to land. But I think like the best of the best are going to be involved here. I think Houston and Alabama are going to show interest in Hunter Sallis. I think Arkansas is going to show interest in Hunter Sallis. I think it's possible that some true blue blood programs like Kansas, like Kentucky, like UCLA, I think it's possible that those programs show interest in Hunter Sallis as well. And without having dug super deep into all of their rosters and exactly who's coming, who's going, what it all means, I don't want to necessarily just say, oh, any program is going to be interested in him. There are some that are going to make more sense than others, but I wouldn't be surprised to see a laundry list of excellent programs showing interest in Hunter Sallis. Sallis is close friends with Wisconsin point guard Chucky Hepburn, which is another element to keep an eye on. Whether that means they would both play at Wisconsin, whether that means Hepburn would also enter the portal and they would try to play together, whether it means completely nothing, I don't know, but I'm going to report it because it is a fact, and it is something that I think is at least interesting when looking at the transfer portal. We see players sometimes kind of package themselves together. They're both guards, and Hepburn's more of a one, so I'd be curious if that would be a situation where Sallis would be more comfortable playing off the ball, or what that might happen, what might happen with that there. But again, I expect to see some pretty big names involved in the Hunter Sallis sweepstakes as we get further into the transfer portal season. And then the last thing I want to make a note on is just the NIL element here. And this is more about Gonzaga in general. I don't think, and I have no idea, I have no information whatsoever. I don't know how much NIL plays a role for either Sallis or Dominick Harris at this point, but I am curious how NIL is going to play a role for Gonzaga in general in the transfer portal era. Because I mentioned it with kind of the comments about Hunter Dickinson earlier, like some players are going to enter the portal looking for the biggest paycheck that they can get. And there is nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with that. I get the feeling that Hunter Sallis is primarily interested in finding a situation that fits his skill set and puts him in a position to play enough minutes and get enough attention to be an NBA draft pick. I feel very confident that that is Hunter Sallis's priority, and the money that comes with that, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, because it should matter a little bit, but I think it is secondary to that. I suspect that is similar with Dominick Harris, because I just don't think that Dom is in a position to necessarily go get a whole bunch of money through NIL. So I don't think it's impacting these guys all that much. I don't think it impacted their decision to leave all that much, but it does impact how much Gonzaga can, what kind of players Gonzaga can get through the transfer portal. Are they able to get players to come in and pay them enough money? You know, Nigel Pack went from Kansas State to Miami last year, played in the Final Four. I think he got like $400,000. I don't know that Gonzaga's dishing that out for guys, you know, in the portal right now. So if they are looking at some of these high profile names, can they pay them? Is that going to be something that becomes an issue? I'm all for NIL. I'm all for transfer portal. I have made that very clear on this podcast, but it is interesting to see what that means for a program like Gonzaga, which is so unique in the sense that they are this powerhouse. They are a highly decorated place to play. People, they're coveted. People want to play here. People want to succeed here. People want to, they're going to be on TV a lot. They have NBA aspirations. Like, it all makes sense, but this is not a program that has as much money as a lot of the Power 5 programs. So is that going to impact them? Is that going to be something that becomes an issue for Mark Few and their staff? We'll have to see. Again, don't think it necessarily played a huge role with Dom and Sallis. I don't want to speak for them because I just don't know. But it'll be interesting to see how it impacts their ability to land big name transfers, or even any transfers. They're going to get some. They're going to get a couple, and they're going to get some good ones, because Mark Few he's very successful at finding the right kind of fits in the transfer portal. But I wonder how many players they're going to kind of have to eliminate just because those players are asking for more money than they're willing or able to pay. All right, that is going to do it for me today. Plenty more coming your way this week. We'll continue our season in review series. We're going to talk transfer portal updates, players the Zags could pursue in particular. We're going to get some updates on the baseball team, some Zags and the NBA stuff, all sorts of fantastic content coming your way this week. You can find us wherever you get podcasts. You can find it on YouTube as well. Go hit that subscribe button if you have not done so yet. All right, thank you all for listening. And as always, go Zags.